eNCA. I mean, a lot of questions are being asked. The first thing, obviously, everybody has welcomed the decision for the president to bring the troops back, but is this too little too late?
Well, I don't think so. Remember that South African government is abiding to the decisions, or with the decisions made by the regional bloc, this community of Central African states. And I must say the emphasis has now shifted from a military operation or intervention to a process, a negotiated or a mediation process, which I think South Africans intuitively are more comfortable with, because that's where our experience lies. So I think it's a good outcome that we are withdrawing the remaining few troops from the CAR back to South Africa. But in the meantime, we are preparing ourselves for yet another mission. I don't know if people are quite aware of this.
In the DRC?
In the DRC, which the United Nations has given a mandate for, the critical thing. So I don't know if it's too little, too late. We've learned some bitter lessons here. The one lesson, in my view, that we are beginning to learn is to deploy on a bilateral basis, on the basis of an MOU, to provide protection services and retraining services to a very weak government is a risky thing to do. We've done it in Burundi before. It worked. We are now doing it in the CAR. It didn't work. We shouldn't do this again. We should go in to help make and keep the peace under a regional umbrella with the blessing of the African Union, where, ironically, President Zuma's former wife sits. So Mrs. Zuma is trying to turn that AU ship around as well and get the things in place. And finally, with the authorization or at least the agreement of the United Nations Security Council. If we play the game like that, we won't be in trouble as we are now.
Was it a bad decision then? Would you say that the president made a bad decision then to have sent troops there in the first place? Because you say it worked in Burundi, it didn't work this time because it was not a stable government and we were not there to keep peace.
Correct.
We went there in a government that was where we didn't know where it could end up.
Correct. I would question, there are so many questions. At least Parliament is starting to address these, and the public at large, despite President Zuma's request for us not to discuss military matters. We must discuss this. The public purse is at stake and our lives are at stake. So, and if President Zuma says we are dying for our foreign policy, we must understand what is the purpose of our foreign policy, especially in Africa. So I think it's not a bad thing to ask these questions. I do think a mistake was made, and I wonder whether we had the appropriate intelligence to guide us through the decision making. This is where I would put the question. It's a bit of an operational question, I know. Nevertheless, how do you learn lessons otherwise if this information is not forthcoming? So my question is, I think it was worth having a presence elsewhere in Africa, because one of our roles in Africa, I would argue, as a strong economy and a strong African country, a leading African country, is to help make and keep and rebuild the peace. But the terms on which we do this must be carefully worked out, and to go in on a bilateral basis supporting a shaky government, far from democracy, far from rebuilding a democracy, in fact, is questionable.
Now we're moving to the DRC, and everybody's asking once again, we are sending our men. We're sending more South African soldiers into another country that is also not necessarily very stable, especially within the eastern DRC, where they're going again. We've known that there's rebel fighters there. We know that a lot of people are not happy with the ruling of Kabila. So there's a possibility there that we might be going into another danger zone and once again putting our soldiers at risk. Is this also not a good idea?
It is true that becoming involved in the eastern part of the DRC, fighting the M23 rebels, it's an explicit mandate. It's a robust mandate to neutralize them. It's an intervention force. It's a peace enforcement operation. It's not a peacekeeping mission. It is true it's a risky operation. Possibly people will also get hurt in that process. This time around, I think it's slightly different. We're going in there with a different mandate. That mandate is really justifiable. And I think our president, in the discussion that we're going to have in the coming days and weeks, must make it very clear that we are going in with the support of the region, of the AU, and of the UN. And that everybody agrees that to bring relative peace and stability to that part of the Great Lakes region is critically important, and that South Africa has the hardware to be deployed there so we can make a difference. It is true, and this is a difficult situation, it is true that Kabila is under pressure. It is true that the DRC is an unstable country, if not a government. But we have to make a decision in principle. Does South Africa, with its relative power, deploy in Africa to help make and keep the peace? Or do we withdraw beyond, the Limpopo, and just look at ourselves and our own problems? I think we are quite ambitious as South Africans. Our government and the ruling party is also ambitious. We think we have a role to play, and we will do it yet again, and we'll take this risk. We are taking this risk elsewhere in Sudan, in the South Sudan, yes. That's right. In Somalia, we are more careful. Ethiopia, Eritrea, there are many examples where we've done this before. The lesson, yet again, is not to go in there as South Africans alone, trying to rescue, some kind of a rescue mission, be the big man on the block, is to work with partners in the region, with support from the region and from bigger organizations. It's a very costly affair, by the way, so we would want the UN to help pay the costs, defer the costs. It's the biggest problem, by the way, that we face as a continent is peacemaking and peacekeeping. Who can afford that? We need assistance from elsewhere.
That's the big question that we were asking. Anthoni, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure having with us. Pearls of knowledge that you shared with us there. That was military expert Anthoni van Nieuwkerk giving us his take there on what is happening on the African continent and our peacekeeping missions.